Thank you, Danny, and good afternoon to all. I'm really happy to be back here because last time I flew into San Francisco, it was in a solar-powered airplane flying from Hawaii and going all around the world. So, of course, it's an iconic place to speak about renewable energy. But what I would like to tell you is that all the wonderful things that we have heard today are obvious for us here in this room. But they are not obvious for everybody. They are not obvious for a lot of people who have the power, financial power or political power. And sometimes these people don't even care about the environment or they deny climate change. And we have to speak also their language. Otherwise, it is wishful thinking to believe that just by being together, we're going to change the world. We have to change other people's minds. And for this, we have to speak their language. And what is their language? It's the language of finance, the language of profit, of job creation, of growth. And this is also what we can offer with clean technologies and renewable energies. There are so many solutions that can create growth, but a clean growth. Not a growth that has more, but a growth that replaces the old polluting devices with new modern systems that are more efficient and cleaner. So this is why with the Solar Impulse Foundation, after the success of the round the world flight, we have decided to select 1,000 solutions that can be technologies, systems, products, programs, which can protect the environment in an economically profitable way. And we're putting a label on the profitability side. It has to be profitable. And then what do we do with it? We go to the governments, we go to the heads of states, we go to the big corporations and institutions, and show them what are the tools that we have today to make money. And by the way, to protect the environment. But to some people, don't even tell it, they don't care. Because these solutions can be implemented even if climate change did not exist. Even if the environment was not in danger. These solutions are profitable, create jobs, and make profit. And I think these are the type of arguments that we have to use when we are outside of this room, when we are not with people who care about the environment. So really, never forget one thing. If you want to convince someone, speak his language, don't speak yours. And this is why we need all these tools, and this is why with Danny Kennedy we have signed this agreement together to look for more solutions, to bring in entrepreneurs, and to be able to be helpful to as many people as possible. So thank you for allowing me to present what the Solar Impulse Foundation is doing.
Merci. All right, thank you, Bertrand. Remy, may I have the clicker? Ah. Thank you very much. Thank you for that, and thank you to the audience for hanging in there and hanging out with us for another hour. It's going to run a little like the show you just had. We're going to do the flash presentation style, the sort of quick TED Talk, big idea presentation by these 4 big thinkers, followed by questions, some interrogation from me perhaps, but mostly with you. So hang in there and we'll have roving mics for you to have a conversation with these wonderful people. I should introduce myself. I'm Danny Kennedy. I'm the Managing Director of the California Clean Energy Fund. We have the good privilege of supporting startups here and around the world to drive climate solutions. We have created companies for 14 years here in the state of California. We've invested in them, promoted them, capitalized them, and built communities for them in different markets and different geographies for those years. You know, you probably heard of Tesla. We were very early in Tesla. You probably haven't heard of some of the other companies we're in right now, like Code Cycle, but the entrepreneurs here today. Opus 12, you saw this morning, they were one of our companies. We get to play with all the cool entrepreneurs, and we're working with Bertrand and the Solar Impulse Foundation to feed those voices of entrepreneurs and startups into the formal processes which are being convened here in San Francisco this week to say, hey, we've got the solutions. We need you to get on the bus or get out of the way to the governments of the world. But with that said, I do want to actually start with a moment on the government of California and give it credit, which I don't think we've actually stopped and done enough work with. And forgive me for editorializing a bit here before we get to our panel. I just wanted to set some context for the next energy agenda. Because to be real, the next energy agenda has just been set in law in the state of California. This legislation is a much bigger thing than I think we're giving it. And I actually wanted the House to raise the lights and turn them on, because I felt like when we talked about it during the day, we weren't doing it in the full light of day. Would you mind, Maestro, turning on the daylight? Thank you. I just feel like you need a bit of light. This goddamn bill says that the 5th largest economy in the world is going to be renewably powered by 2045. That's crazy. I do this for a living. I've been doing this for 25 years. I've built companies, I've raised billions of dollars, I've invested tens of millions, and we don't know how to do 100%, but we've just got a law that made it the outcome. The goal is now in the sand, and beyond that, we haven't even mentioned this, an executive order was issued yesterday, and admittedly executive orders don't have the force of law, but they're pretty influential in investor communities and setting signals to markets and making them. And that executive order says not only does the electricity sector have to be renewably powered by 2045 in the 5th largest economy in the world, but the state has to be carbon neutral, which means transport, which means industry, which means all these other hard nut problems, local regional aviation, shipping, ferries, you name it. We have to electrify those puppies and put them on clean energy in the next 25 years. My job's just been made. I mean, you know, this thing's going to go. I call it the clean tech cyclone, or the hurricane for you North Americans. This is about to pop because the water is really warm in California all of a sudden. We've had a signal set from on high and a law set in stone that says we will be buying the services, we will be supporting the R&D, we will be doing the work to integrate them all, and we will be making that happen. And the debate from here on out is now no longer about what is the goal, what's the outcome. That's it, 100%, you don't do more than that, right? And we're not going to go back from that. So it's going to be about the conditions of it, the fairness, in my view, whether we lift all boats as we create a new energy system and we lift up the people who were historically harmed by the dirty energy system of the 20th century, and then the speed of it. I believe we will ratchet further, faster, as climate science kicks in, as Florence strikes the East Coast, and God knows what happens in the next fire season in California, and we will demand more, sooner, better. So that's why we call our work Speed Well with regards to Bertrand and the Solar Impulse Foundation. We want to do better, faster, and build more startups and more entrepreneurs. And the last thing I'll say before I do hand off is that this means we will attract wealth and value and jobs and opportunity to the Golden State. That's what we've just done by setting this gauntlet down and throwing the challenge to the rest of the world. And we've actually done some analysis at the California Clean Energy Fund that we haven't published until today, just to show that this is already happening as the state has got its stuff together. I won't swear, but we are getting organized at attracting clean energy investment. This is the dollar value of the US national market of all Series A through J, all venture, all private equity, all angel money, all project finance for those same firms, convertible notes, you name it, all lumped in here. 5 years ago, it was a $3.5 billion world in the United States. As the economy's picked up, so too the market's grown to $4 billion, fairly good clip. California has gone from a quarter of that market share to a half of it because our leadership sets a signal, makes a statement, says we want this, we want the jobs, we want the value creation, we share it with our populations, we share it around the regions of California, and that's what the California energy innovation ecosystem and other things that we work with do. So that's something I just wanted to set up, that the agenda is now, and California is the warm waters off the coast of China, which is going to make the rest of Asia and Africa and the world go to 100% too. That's the hurricane that's about to happen. To hear more, you will hear from the leaders, I think, of what's really going to happen. And I want to first introduce Angelina Galiteva. I'll introduce each of them as they get up individually. Angelina is one of the forces behind the storm, I got to say. Aside from being vice chair currently of the Californian Independent Systems Operator, she's the founder of the 100% Renewables Policy Institute, which really started the crazy conversation a few years ago. When people were just like, oh, that's silly. We can't talk about 100%. That's cray-cray. She was saying it was doable, and she's about to become the chair of the Californian grid to make it all happen. Angelina. Stand up. And there's the clicker. Thank you.
Governor and everybody else for pushing for 100% renewable energy. Fifth largest economy, as Danny said, and moving forward full speed. And as we heard before, it's not just being able to talk about 100% renewable energy, but being able to talk with the language of finance, with the language of project development, and with the language of infrastructure. What's really important is we can say, oh, we have more than enough solar to power the whole world. If we capture just 2 seconds of the solar radiation that hits the world every single day, we can power the world for a year. Or we have enough wind energy, we have enough hydro energy, and then you have the grid operator, and you have the utilities, and you have us coming in and saying, reality check, there's an infrastructure component. That infrastructure has to be able to handle 100% renewable energy. And that's where the conversation gets real. Because if the utilities and if the grid operators turn around and say, this is pie in the sky and it can't happen, which is what the case was about 20 years ago when we initially said 10% renewable energy. Oh, no, that's impossible to happen. 20% renewable energy. Oh, that's Armageddon. And I was in the utility business then because, you know, as a renewable energy advocate, you want to go to the belly of the beast and learn the enemy from within so you can combat the enemy, right? You turn around and you start pushing. Yes, you can go to 100%. And even Greenpeace was coming around and saying, you know, Angelina, 100% doesn't sound realistic. You should say 50% because 50% makes you sound credible to the infrastructure people. I'm like, I am the infrastructure people. If we don't go for 100%, you're never going to get to 100%. Who said let's go 50% to the moon? No, we're going the whole way. So it was 100% renewable energy, and unless that is the goal and the narrative, it's important to have the vision. If you have the vision, then progress happens. And of course, working with Danny Kennedy, working with David Hochschild, working with everybody, we can make it happen. You do need regulation. Regulation sets the vision. If we didn't have the RPS in California, we wouldn't be where we are today. Look at 2010. In 2010, we only had 85 megawatts solar on the grid. And where are we today? And how much have we employed and how much have we installed? And when I hear the nuclear narrative, it's we've installed the equivalent of 5 or 6 nuclear power plants in less than 10 years with no environmental impact, no impact on hydro resources, no talk of nuclear proliferation or the division in the world in the haves and the haves not. So as we move into the climate debate, let's not forget the narrative of solar, wind, storage, new technologies being able to solve the issue. And of course, wind is important as well. What happened in California is a quantum shift. We haven't even incorporated what we need to be doing on the grid side to get to 100% renewable energy. We are still working on the 50% portfolio standard. But keep in mind that the 50% RPS in California does not include large hydropower over 30 megawatts, and it does not include behind-the-meter solar. That is an additional 10 or 15% on the grid of renewable energy. And on several occasions here in California, when people tell us you can't run the grid on renewables, yes, we can. We've been able to run it on over 70% of renewable energy on several occasions, and it's more resilient, it's more reliable, and it is much more predictable than anybody ever thought. We've had a shift in where the grid operator in California basically came out and said, oh yeah, we can do 100%, and we can reach it. It's not technologically impossible, but we need the legislation, we need the vision, we need to be able to plan the infrastructure so that we can get to the end goal. And that's what SB 100 does, and that's what the executive order does, which is so important because it sets the course, and then we can get to the end goal much faster. This is the duck curve. Everybody knows the duck curve. Everybody is working towards the duck curve, and our issue is not baseload power. We don't need baseload. We need flexibility. We need resources that are able to balance a renewable powered grid. What are those resources that are going to provide us the flexibility? And we need renewables, balancing renewables, and everybody being a good grid operator so that we can have the same rules of the road and ensure that what the vision that has been set by SB 100 can achieve, and also what the customers want, because we don't talk about it enough, but this is not only a top-down approach, this is a bottom-up approach. What we've seen in California is a tsunami of a movement in terms of communities demanding higher percentages of renewable energy. Before we had SB 100, we have the CCA movement, the community choice aggregators, who are basically communities and regions coming together and saying, we're going to be in control of our power supply. We want to be able to have 100% renewable energies. Cities saying we can do it cheaper and faster. And basically, that is a phenomenal movement that will probably be covering 50 to 70% of California's population. So what we're seeing with these big ramps and the big resource change that's happening in California is making sure that we can move to the 100% renewable energy with flexible resources that balance a renewable grid, no baseload resources, so the big behemoths in terms of centralized power stations are becoming obsolete because you're going to have a distributed, decarbonized, diversified resource system that relies on flexibility. And again, renewables balancing renewables, this is important because as we transition to a global map, and people having to deal with drought and having to balance what renewables are going to be able to supply their demand and their infrastructure, here's what happens in a drought situation. And with climate change, we're going to have much more droughts in California as well. And I had the ISO make up this map specifically for Brazil, because Brazil, being a heavy hydro country, was going through a drought as we were going through a drought and wanted to ensure that they could balance the hydro with solar resources. And this is a perfect match. The growth of solar in California, which I showed on the other maps, which is now, together with all renewables, over 20,000 megawatts, perfectly coincided with the reduction in hydropower because we had a drought. And the vision of how we can power the whole of the United States with renewable energy is not mine. It's not the ISO's. It's not California's. We could be, we're often called Californians, all those hippies, Birkenstock wearing, granola eating people that don't have a realistic point of view for the grid. No, we're the visionaries, and we've set a course of how 100% renewable energy can absolutely meet the demands of the 5th largest economy in the world. But this was a slide that was presented at the 100% Renewable Energy Conference that Danny and us organized together by NREL. And this is our own NREL saying, yes, the US has enough resources that we can power all of the United States with 100% renewable energy, keeping in mind that we optimize infrastructure and we optimize the grid. The grid is extremely important in being able to take all of the distributed resources on the customer end side, along with some of the centralized power stations, along with storage, along with all the other resources that we have on the grid, including vehicle-to-grid charging, including customers participating and aggregation, to be able to power all of the United States collectively with 100% renewable energy, which then translates to the world. So, yes, it's possible. Yes, we can do it. California shows the way. Let's make sure the world does it too. Thank you.
Thank you, Angelina. Just so that we can keep it rolling and get all the folk up here. And the next is a great sort of, swing of the pendulum to the micro here in California, because Angelina obviously has the big picture and truly runs the map and the system. And Dave Meckles, who's the next speaker, has been the Director of Campus Planning for the California College of the Arts here in the Bay Area for 30 years, I believe. And if you all driven through San Francisco, let alone if you live here, you've probably seen all these CCA buildings everywhere. The campus is a diverse and wonderful thing that I don't fully understand, but I'm sure Dave does intimately. And moreover, he's building the first 100% microgrid on that campus here in San Francisco with that real estate footprint. So Dave, tell us about it.
Right. Thank you, Dan. So I've been sitting through the talks today, starting with Al Gore, and I thought, wow, this amazing high-level systemic, global, scalable ideas. And I'm going to talk to you about a little tiny college. And the reason I'm going to talk to you about it is because I think there are probably people, probably more outside this room than in, who are wondering, like, what could I do or what could my organization do? We're not Apple. We're not going to have the biggest solar array on our roof. How can we do something? So we're a 111-year-old college, 2,000 students. We have art and design programs. We're creating students that go out and use design thinking and creativity to improve the world. And we bought a building 25 years ago in San Francisco before all the solar technology was very advanced. But it was a very cool building. And it's 140,000 square foot, used to be a Greyhound maintenance facility. So what did this building have that struck us 25 years ago? Big volume, lots of natural daylight, natural ventilation, and we're in a great microclimate here. So basically, 25 years ago, we did the largest Eichler house on the planet. We did solar hot water panels on the roof, 8,000-gallon water tank, poured a 3-inch slab with water tubes in it, and basically made a building with a very simple controller that's been operating beautifully for 25 years without any systems, right? So that's what you would call passive design. Well, the college has grown. We acquired another 2.5 acres, and we started talking to thought leaders on what we might do version 2.0. So we hired a very good architect, Jeannie Gang, out of Chicago. She's a MacArthur Award winner. And almost immediately, the first thing she said to me, okay, you've kind of been passive. You know, we got to get aggressively passive. So she's from the Midwest. She likes these little puns. And we started working with Amory Lovins, who's going to be here tomorrow at the Rocky Mountain Institute, working with Mac McQuan and Craig Worcester up at Stone Edge Farm in Sonoma, if any of you know that. Really cool microgrid and a little hydrogen production facility. Studio Gang locally, our sustainability consultants, Atelier 10, and then so on and so forth. So really cool crew looking at how we can get super passive, but then take advantage of technology. So what we're doing is basically harvesting virtually every photon that falls on this site, moving it around. We're going to start out storing it in batteries. We don't think that's the future. We think we'll end up storing in hydrogen, but we got to start with what's out there right now. And this basically allows us to create all the energy we need and manage it. But remember what I said at the beginning. We're in a 111-year-old art school. What does an art school have? Things like a glass blowing program, which has a 2100-degree furnace that runs all the time. So we're moving our furnaces over to electric. It's really caused us to rethink what an art school is, basically. It's been a phenomenal process, and we will open in fall of 2021. So those of you who are in the Bay Area or who come to the Bay Area, David Mecke, give me a call. We'll show you.
Thank you so much, David. I'm sure you'll get lots of questions from the local folk, and I think some of the panelists are probably going to be really interested too. But going to keep it rolling here, and it's a great honor for me to introduce the next speaker because he's somewhat of a hero of mine. He has been truly the survivor of the solar industry. I'm a sort of solar addict, sort of obsessive, you know, whatever, sick person, I think. But this guy's been, you know, an inspiration for hanging on to what we call the solar coaster in the industry as it goes up and down in its way, because it keeps on driving cost out of the system, and it's hard to build businesses when you just keep on asymptoting towards zero and there's no oxygen in the room. But Dr. Zhengrong Shi is his name. I first met him in Australia. He's a dual citizen of Australia and China, and really is without overstating this, success has many fathers, of course, but Dr. Shi is probably one of the people who made China get into solar and take it to scale. And for that, we have to thank him and China, because it dropped the cost per unit and made solar the lowest cost source of electricity ever, anywhere, from any technology. Today, we are seeing PPAs signed at 2 cents per kilowatt hour. In dollar-adjusted terms, that is the cheapest juice that has ever been made on Earth. And it is not all because of this man, but because of people like Dr. Zhengrong Shi, the founder of Suntech before his current business. He has many businesses, but the one I think we'll hear about is Sun Man. Zhengrong.
Thank you, Danny, for the introduction. And yeah, it's really pleased to be here because I just flew in yesterday. Actually, jet lag is hitting me now, so it's good for me to stand up. And yeah, I'm a solar veteran. You know, I started my solar career 30 years ago. And from laboratory to business, now back to laboratory again, because still a lot of innovation needs to be done. And when I started solar, we never thought, you know, solar could be the situation like today. And almost like 18 years ago, when I started Suntech, you know, Power, solar panel price was $6 per watt. But now is how much? I guess is 50 cents per watt. In many countries already below that, you know, even below 40 cents. So, and really the cost of manufacturing solar and the cost of PV electricity, it has coming down so dramatically. So I think there's a few factors, you know, we can attribute to this great cost reduction. First of all is government policy. Without policy, you know, we couldn't do much. The second is technology, you know, talent, and capital. So it's very important, I believe, for China, you know, solar business, and initially the technology is like, you know, many people like myself, we were educated in overseas and you know, went to China and started solar business. And later on there was a, you know, boom of capital, you know, like SunPower, Suntech, Q-Cells, and many, like more than 10 companies being listed in the capital market, raised probably over, you know, 15 or 20 billion dollars, US dollars, you know, for business to expand. So these are, you know, are very important, you know, factors for the industry of today. And just give you an idea, you know, what's the cost reduction of solar. I mean, we look at the time scale, you know, start from last year and this year in many countries, including US, China, India, the PPA price of solar electricity already dropped to below, you know, 2 cents per kilowatt hour. And we believe it's going to continue to drop. And if you look at the panel price, I already said is around 50 or below 50 cents per watt here in US. In China and other countries is even lower. And for whole system in China, you know, you're only talking about 4 RMB, you know, 4 yuan per watt divided by 7, that's US dollars. So I think if US government can get rid of this anti-dumping, this silly thing, I think the cost for solar system here in USA will be, you know, almost similar to other countries. So it's really pleased to see that. And is there any more reason to continue to drop the price? I guess probably not, because it's already more competitive than coal and other you know, generation technology. Personally, you know, many people question whether solar can be a base load technology. Personally, you know, I believe, you know, solar can be the base load technology because I have been presenting this, you know, blue globe for many years because we know sun is moved from east to west, right? And if we can connect the global cables grid, basically just connect the cables around the boundaries of every country, I mean, we can produce a global solar energy grid. This can be done. And I think the CEO, Mr. Sun of SoftBank, you know, we had a chat about 3 years ago in his office. Initially, like, was a courtesy 30 minutes talk. Then the talk lasted for 3 hours because he had a similar vision, you know, more than 3 years ago, tried to build you know, wind, solar, maybe some hydropower in Mongolia because he's somehow got a big piece of land. So he asked me, 4 years ago or 3 years ago, Dr. Shi, could you produce 20 gigawatt of solar panel in Mongolia at 6 US cents per kilowatt hour? Then we buy your electricity from Mongolia and transmit it through China, Korea, back to Japan. He's going to buy electricity in Japan and do wholesale and retail in Japan. We spent about 6 months, do this study. I said, Mr. Sun, if you give me 20 gigawatt, we can do 3 cents per kilowatt hour. So, now it's already happening, right? So that's why Mr. Sun now he announced he's going to invest 200 gigawatt in Saudi Arabia this moment. And also, the chairman of State Grid of China, he's also promoted this concept in the last 2 years globally. So I think really if we can connect the global grid together, solar can be the base load, for global grid. Plus, we have local development of rooftops, rooftops and commercial rooftops and batteries and wind and so on. So we can also provide the supply, the peak supply to the local grid market, and globally we can, provide the base load. And the next question, I often hearing from people, challenge, okay, wind is good and solar is also good, but they are intermittent technology. And of course, now we have, battery as a storage. And people also challenge, electric car is good and can only drive cars. We have train, we have aircraft, we have like a submarine and all other technology which requires much high energy density. So, which is true. So personally, I believe apart from electric car, I think solar plus hydrogen fuel cell, that could be a great opportunity in the future. Because, at this moment in China, many part of, world, we have wind farms, we have solar farms, but due to the transmission issue and the consumption issue, much of the electricity actually is like a giveaway. Maybe in China there was some issue of a solar panel, 30% of electricity was give up because of this transmission issue. So people said if we can use, rather wasting this electricity, we use this electricity to generate hydrogen and other fuels, so that can be, as energy storage to store the hydrogen. And if we use fuel cells, we can generate electricity, and at much competitive and a much higher power density. So which I believe, in few years' time, if we can commercialize hydrogen fuel cell in a way as photovoltaic cells in terms of cost, in terms of reliability, I do believe if we can produce like 100 kilowatt of fuel cells, at the cost of below $100, I think that would be a great opportunity for hydrogen. So personally, I have great passion for hydrogen, and I'm working on next generation of hydrogen fuel cell development as well. So we feel very passionate and confident, for this type of technology to be commercialized like solar in the future. For renewable energy, I say for many years, like solar is not just about business. Its impact is beyond business. So we believe what we are doing is good to the benefit. It will last forever for our next generations. Thank you.
Thank you. Sure. So I told you you'd get some big ideas in this one, starting with Bertrand Piccard, the madman who flew around the world without any fuel in his plane, and, Dr. Shi presenting a grid that stretches across the globe. Good ideas. But he was pretty moderate there on the capital conversation. He said he and Masashi Son sat down for 3 hours and talked about solar at scale and came up with a 200 gigawatt proposal in Saudi Arabia, which is like a $200 billion price tag. Okay, so our next speaker is going to take you from B to T, the $1 trillion threshold, because that's actually what we're talking about. What all of today's energy conversation has been about, the transition of our electricity and mobility sectors, is $1 trillion of work annually for the next 25 years. And one big sector of that is the solar that is going to be deployed to power equatorial countries with their electricity requirements. And Lila Tretikov is the leader that is going to take us there. You probably never heard of her. She's not as well known in the US as she should be. She's well known in Europe, particularly France and India, where the organization she leads, the Terrawatt Initiative, is sort of partnered cheek by jowl with the International Solar Alliance, which is basically driving that vision of equatorial adoption of massive solar deployment to power the billions plus that don't have good, affordable electricity and can get it from the sun. And the story that Lila's going to tell you, I think, is one that we all need to know and get behind on finance. She's got an amazing pedigree herself out of computer science, and previously the CEO of the Wikimedia Foundation that gave me everything I tell my kids. And now she's building a similar internet platform for investment to raise $1 trillion to power the world with solar. Lila Tretikov.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I can't tell you how inspired I am to be back in California, how inspired I am by all of you with everything that's going on here, the leadership that California is showing the world. And as you just heard, about 120 countries globally are located between the Tropic of Cancer and Tropic of Capricorn. And with that, you have an abundance of solar energy. And yet, it is exactly in those regions that we have the most poverty, both in terms of finances, but also in terms of energy poverty. We still have about 1 billion people without electricity today. And within those regions, this is also where people are suffering and dying. In fact, about 1 million people die a year just from the fuels that are used within the home, right? So these are mostly women and children that are affected by this. So as inspired I am by California, make no mistakes, there are nearly 200 nations that need to follow. In fact, this morning I woke up in my hotel room, and the art that was on the wall, that was in front of me, was a series of butterflies, all extinct. They were made out of paper, thank God. But in that, it made me think about the systemic effects that we are embarking on, even now with this new transition, new transformation, energy transition that is happening today. The steps that we're taking today are going to pay off in the next billion years, in fact, because it took us 100 years to impact the world for the next billion years. So with that, how many of you here had to learn a completely different language? Great. So I had to do it twice in my life. And you probably know exactly how painful it is to transfer one system into another. It takes a very long time. So how can we accelerate the changes that we need to make in the next 10 to 20 years? We need to move really, really rapidly to entirely change our energy system. And that energy system doesn't just change what we do with solar generation or the power generation. It has to change the entire supply chain. Luckily, we actually have some experience with that. We had some major infrastructure support in the beginning and mid of last century. In fact, the American Marshall Plan and the New Deal were reaction and investments in infrastructure that significantly changed the face of Europe and the face of the United States. The kind of investments that we need today we're looking at roughly $7 million a day that we need to invest to just keep up with our Paris Agreement goals. We need the same amount of investments, the same level of impact as we had in the last century to stem the pain that we are dealing with now, the problems that we're already facing altogether. So there's few things that we need to keep in mind. We need to bring the nations together, not just California, but we need to bring in the effectively entire planet. And we at Terrawatt are starting with the countries in Africa and countries in Asia, bringing them together, creating the policy frameworks that are extremely important, they're fundamental in order to be able to scale the markets, the solar market. The next piece is aggregating that demand. It's difficult to finance individual rooftop at the time. But when you have hundreds of thousands of that, it's much easier for the money to flow into the system. And finally, you need to standardize how you deal with the market, right? Standard contracts, standard agreements are really, really important. It minimizes the problems that can result downstream. And finally, below all of that, we need digital enablement. These systems are new, they're interconnected, and they need to be managed as a global network grid. We just saw a global grid of solar networks. Well, this is not too dissimilar from the internet network that we have today. So this is not an out there thought. But in order for us to manage it, again, we need a protocol, we need a market to manage that. And that's the final piece of the equation that Terrawatt is working on. So Terrawatt is a foundation. We do this as part of the global economic system. We work with all of the different players to enable this type of evolution. And the reality is unlocking $1 trillion is just the beginning. In fact, we have $9 trillion sitting in zero or less than zero investments globally. We need to be unlocking those, and we need to be doing that tomorrow.
Thank you. So let's give it up for the whole panel before we get to questions. And we're going to need mics in the audience, if that's all right. But please thank Angelina, David, Bertrand, who's left, Zhengrong, and Lila. Okay. We've got just shy of half an hour to have a conversation. I know there's bubbling questions. There's been a lot. There's technology. There's finance. There's vision. There's specifics. Who wants to go first? Please.
I'm curious if you're working with blockchain in any of the stuff that you're doing, blockchain, supply chain.
So, Lila?
Sure, I can take this. So I was talking about the interconnection of the grid and the interconnection of the financial networks that back it. So blockchain is fundamentally just a technology that enables us to provide those transactions securely and cryptographically encrypted. So we look at using it for that.
Anyone else? Is the California ISO moving on to a blockchain ledger?
Not at this stage.
What's going on? Come on, Angelina. We're at the cutting edge. Sir.
I had a question for Angelina. We just heard about the local grid and we heard about a global grid, right? And yet we just failed California to do the Western grid regionalization. Can you tell us what are the barriers to Dr. Shi's vision of having solar as a globally connected part of the grid?
Excellent question. Excellent question. Regional integration is important, specifically for that issue of renewables, balancing renewables, and being able to take advantage of that east-west connection and east-west movement, where meeting the duck, the belly of the duck or the head of the duck with power coming from outside because of the time difference is important, and being able to push California renewables when we have overgeneration, because as Dr. Shi mentioned, you have overgeneration issues. Sometimes you just have to either waste it or pay someone to take that energy and take that power. So making hydrogen with it, extremely valuable. Desalinating, because we're in a drought, we need to be able to desalinate, and desalination for rural and agricultural water is important too. Water is the next barrier. Also very important for Africa as well. So regional integration allows us to optimize the grid and minimize the need for storage, because you're able to take the fluctuating renewables on a wider geographic footprint. The wider, the bigger the footprint, the more efficient the system is, which is what the NREL map shows as well if you have a completely integrated system throughout the US. Dr. Shi has taken it even further to where it's a global network, and that should be the dream. I mean, that's a really, really good initiative.
Get on that thing, will you? Yeah.
So yes, so I mean, having a vision without action, you're just basically dreaming. Having action without a vision, you're wasting your time. So we need to have the vision and the action together. It failed in California not because of technological issues, not because you're not able to optimize the grid and achieve benefits, not because it's not economically desirable because people make money, because of government and governance, because of people not being able to agree who should be in control. And because you have more load than this person, and there's skepticism towards California, and there's skepticism from California to the coal states, who has more votes, whose vote weighs more. Governance and fear of the unknown is what kind of stopped having an integrated vision. But on the technical side, we can do it. We have the energy imbalance market. We can take that energy imbalance market to the day-ahead market. There's a lot of things we can do to achieve incremental progress and make sure that we empower the EIM governing body, which governs the actions of the energy imbalance market and allows it to go to the day-ahead and work with other agencies to ensure that we take advantage of that regional collaboration to the extent possible and give everybody the comfort level that it's okay and we can do it and we can all work together to make that happen, because the energy imbalance market has been incredibly successful and regional integration will take us to the next level, and it will happen incrementally.
And not to go down the rabbit hole of the energy imbalance market and all this conversation, I do just want to say, friendly amendment sort of to the conversation, it didn't necessarily fail. I think it's part of the legislative process, have a couple of year bills sometimes to get them right. And in my view, that conversation and what was happening in the legislature this session was about what I said at the start, that we're going to debate how to do this, how to make it fairer, and how to do it faster. And there were concerns on the part of community organizations and others to make sure that if that happens, that it's fair and that it's truly going to be 100%, because that's now the law, and that it can happen in a timely, correct kind of way. So, you know, it's all part of the discourse.
It's an evolutionary process.
It will happen. So it's not done yet. It's not over till it's over. We've got two up the back here and then two over here. The lady in the red hat.
Hi, my name's Dana Smurin, and I live part-time in South Africa and here. And I sit on an advisory board of a company that Danny's also on called the Sun Exchange, and we're a company that crowdsources the ability for people to actually invest in leasing solar panels on schools, on factories, on hotels, because policy is failing us, both in South Africa and Kenya, all over the continent. So Lila, your vision is amazing, and I really applaud it, and the courage that you have to take on trying to create a collective policy across multiple nations which just aren't stable. And so from the concept of citizens' science and citizens being able to do crowdsourcing is, how can we kind of invert this, trying to get a global policy among policymakers, at least on the continent I live in, which I can't see anything consistent, but actually allow the ability for those of us globally to invest in uplifting those cultures and communities. And I'm wondering whether you're kind of looking at the antithesis of a citizenry global uprising to implement solar, as opposed to trying to see whether you can get policy implemented by people who are really just going to term out really quickly.
Yeah, that's a great question, and it just puts the finger on the problem that we're seeing, and it actually happens everywhere. You see this even in the United States. You know, not every state is the same. One of the things that we've been looking at is how to empower people to actually bring this system directly to their home or their village, regardless of the policy segment, and create their own. And the way to do it is to enable people to create their own small financial ecosystem. So you will see, for example, and somebody brought blockchain here. It's interesting because the value exchange of having an electrical grid on one house, for example, and having another person being able to incubate chickens and having a school in the same district, and now you can trade the value. Somebody early on the early panel spoke about this as well, right? So creating a system of values and being able to enable people to trade effectively energy for some other goods, right, with currency that actually not tied to an unstable currency, let's say in an African country, that creates its own network effect. And we start seeing this in different countries around the world, but it's not clear how quickly that's going to be scalable. So we're looking at it from both perspectives.
Have a question in the middle, please.
Yeah. Hi, my name is Nick Clark. I'm a master's PhD candidate at UC Berkeley in Energy and Resources, and I had a question for Dr. Shi about given the amount of curtailment you see with renewables in wind and solar in China right now, and the recent news that the Chinese government was going to be pulling back on the subsidies that they give for those. How do you see in the short to midterm the evolution of renewables there and how that's going to work out?
Yes, I think that's a good question. And the industry has been complaining about this curtailment of solar and power generation in the last 2 or 3 years. So I think governments is certainly making good progress, to solve that issue. And for example, last year in Gansu province there was probably 30% curtailment, and but this year is reduced to around 5 to 10%. So the situation is improve a lot. And this 531 policy change and hurt the local industry a lot. So, and it was very funny, like SNEC, the biggest solar show, happened in Shanghai, for 3 days, and it was like an industry celebration. So the show ended on the 30th of May, but on the 31st of May, the government announced this policy change. So the industry was like, wept all of a sudden, and everybody was shocked. So remained silent for almost 2 months, but now everybody's waking up and find a way to deal with the situation. And I would say, personally, my understanding is for the policy change is probably three aspects. First is because the industry was overheated. I mean, put this way, last year the installation in China was 53 gigawatt. Okay, everybody in the industry knew was overheated. I mean, something happen, but with that thinking in mind, but still nobody wants to stop. So they still want to keep going. So that's government tried to cool down the industry a little bit. That's first point, from my point of view. The second, you look at the gross margin for the companies along the supply chain. I mean, was all very high. Range from 30 to over 50% gross margin. And some big companies also make very ambitious announcement. Okay, panel price will drop to another 30%, and grid parity will come to realized in 2020. And all this announcement being made by big companies. So perhaps you guys are making so much money, you should give some profit to the society. That's probably the second point. The third point, okay, that's give some profit to the society and force the industry to go into the situation of a subsidy-free scenario as quickly as possible. And thirdly, the slowdown a little bit is also a big help for government financial budget. So that's sort of three points which I understood. And you look at after 531 policy change, after 2 months, and many companies, they all wake up and they find a way to continue to grow. Because for many regions, like in southeast region and south and east regions, where the electricity price, the peak price for commercial industry is very high. You're talking around probably 15 cents, okay? 15 cents, US cents. And then you don't need any subsidy if, for self-consumption. So there's a lot of, commercial rooftop distributed generation projects still continue.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of dozen cities that are lining up to do 500 megawatts. So, call it a dozen gigawatts of business in these markets in China that don't need the subsidy. So I think it'll be solved. There's two questions over here. Firstly, the gentleman in blue. What's your question?
On?
Yeah.
It is on? Oh, yeah, okay. This is a question on behalf of the Climate Institute in Washington, D.C. They have a project now, the North American Supergrid, and you seem like the ideal panel to ask because, Dr. Shi, you were showing a globally collected grid of solar. Dr. Tretikov, you're going to have massive needs for power transmission as well. And Dr. Galiteva, I think the point is California is far enough away from the solar in the Southwest and the wind in the Great Plains that having a high voltage direct current grid seems a no-brainer to the extent that it's safer. It's safer, it's not vulnerable to disruption, and it saves 20-25% in line loss. So this is actually a question. What are your thoughts on the practicality and what obstacles would you see in actually implementing this, please? Thank you.
Yeah, I can only tell you in China is already a reality. And I think China is already built, I think it's four high voltage DC line from west to east. And one is, I think, 700, VA, KVA, and another they're going to build 1,000, this high voltage DC. So it's already happening, and I think in China in the last 10 years they spent huge resource and budget on this this great infrastructure development in China. Yeah.
Angelina. The integration of the grid, this is your lowest cost ability to bring higher and higher percentages of renewables on a wider scale and a wider footprint. So it's lower cost than storage, lower cost than anything. So optimizing the grid, optimizing grid operations, making sure that we don't have this patchwork of balancing authorities. There's 38 of them here in the Western grid. And operating much more efficiently is key to making it happen. And certainly as we have more renewables, capturing the ability to bring in wind, whether it's from Montana or anywhere else, is absolutely important, or New Mexico, and then being able to take our solar that's being curtailed in California to those locations as well. There's perfect coincidence. So making sure that we have that grid, we have that ability to move power around is extremely critical. On the other hand, in the sub-Saharan environment, whether it's South Africa, and I was there recently, less than a year ago, where they were debating whether they should have coal-fired power plants and nuclear, and meanwhile, Cape Town is announcing day zero of water when fossil power uses about as much freshwater resources as does the agricultural industry in the whole world. It makes absolutely no sense. Where renewables are abundant and you don't have the infrastructure, so microgrids being able to grow, ability to microfinance and enable, especially empower women in villages to be able to finance those systems and grow cottage industries and have schools and have doctors without borders. This is, again, leapfrogging technologies, allowing our solutions to be transported to sub-Saharan Africa and making sure that we're all collectively curbing climate change, because we can't afford the 1.3 billion people that have no power right now to make the mistakes we made and go into a centralized power system that is fossil-based. So we all need to be working together. Certainly grid integration, absolutely important, not only on the regional scale here in the US, but nationwide as well. Brazil is doing it, China is doing it, other countries are doing it. We can make it happen. That doesn't mean we don't do microgrids, and it doesn't mean that we don't do reliance and reliability based on the pockets that are here that to a certain extent pose a reliability question, and beef up resiliency of our system. So everything works together. Now that we have the vision for the 100%, we can put all the pieces together much more efficiently and much better. So again, vision is important, and everything and all the resources and solutions play together.
Amen, sister. Gentleman in the middle, front row, please, sort of up this way.
Thank you all for your leadership. I'm Chip Cummins. I'm the chairman of the American Renewable Energy Institute on my way back from China, where I was visiting the solar fields of Ningxia, which are the largest solar installation on planet Earth, 100 square kilometers, 26,000 acres, and I believe it's 1,000 megawatts of power. The Saudis have announced a much larger project, $200 billion, 200 gigawatts of power. And my question would be that in terms of the Terrawatt Initiative, the $1 trillion needed to implement Mr. Xi's vision of a global solar grid that could actually satisfy a utility scale solution on that side of centralized power. How does the panel see the implementation, the practicalities of this, since solar is the cheapest of the generating technologies? And do we think that we can do it in time to address the 1,000 gigatons of carbon that we actually now need to remove from the atmosphere? It's not just enough to keep it from going up, but rather we now are at a place where science tells us we have to take it out. So we have a big challenge ahead of us. I know it's a big question, but maybe somebody could answer that. Thank you.
Well, maybe I can comment on this from industry point of view. Now the industry total, manufacture capacity is probably around 120 gigawatt. So, and of course, some of this capacity will be phased out because of new technology, is coming up, and especially like high efficiency PERC cell technology. And also because of this fluctuation, because now we're still subsidy dependent, the fluctuation of the industry, so many companies is very hard, to raise more money and expand the capacity. But technology-wise and manufacturing engineering-wise, there's no problem, because now if we visit the manufacturers in China across the whole value chain, it's fully automated. I mean, you don't need like this pull a 4-meter long ingot. Like one person can look after 20 furnaces. And you look at module manufacture, solar manufacture is all automated, is all robots. So that's not an issue. Supply chain is, again, if we can get rid of this trade barrier and we can build the factories in many countries. Polysilicon, when I started the business, was like $50, went up to $500 per kilogram, but now it's coming back to $12. So the whole supply chain, the manufacturing is quite mature. And I think to deploy that system side still requires innovation, because 2 months ago, because of SoftBank announced this $200 billion investment, and we had a long meeting with the top management. I think installation, local productivity, is too low. Okay, so the time and effort you spend on site to install the panels is too slow. So that's why I think from an innovation point of view, now I try to, my personal again is like innovation, direction of innovation. It could be like I call make this engineering, project engineering into product development. So everything is made in the factory, prefabricated. Once you pull out to the site, you press the button, it's done. You don't need to workers spend months and months on the site. So this type of thing, there's a lot of innovation required, to make it more practical.
Angelina?
I also wanted to say that as we move towards more and more renewables and 100% renewables and electrifying everything, we need to be cognizant of the fact that we're not only going to be relying on one technology alone, like solar. We're going to have wind, we're going to have hydro, we're going to have geothermal, we're going to have biomass, we're going to have storage, microgrids, everything interconnected, so that we have a symphony of resources playing together, but also the built environment. There's going to be innovations in how we build the future. California just passed a law on the Title 24 that requires all new construction incorporate solar. We're going to have zero net energy requirements. Those construction methodologies are going to be transferred to the economies that need them right now. And again, the building blocks of microgrids. The beauty of solar is it's small, it's modular, it's made out of silicon, the most abundant material on the face of this earth. There's no limit to how much we can manufacture. We can also recycle it. So it can be deployed everywhere, but it can be done incrementally in small scale, individual rooftops, powering a car, powering a storage system, microgrid solution, interconnect that with the large grids and with the super grids, and you've built yourself a global system. We can do it. It's not a technological challenge. It was a vision challenge, but we have the vision now. We can make it happen.
Lila?
I actually think the issue isn't whether we can deploy enough solar fast enough. We can. The problem is that we have an incumbent system, right? We have already power plants all around the world that are cheap to operate, that exist. And now, instead of giving subsidies to solar, we need to start moving our policies towards actually taxing those power plants to make that cost go down, because solar is high capex, low opex in relationship, right? The rest of the energy, the fossil fuels, are the opposite, right? They're fairly cheap to operate once you build that enormous power plant, right? So we need to figure out how to help optimize the market towards quickly dropping down the usage of the current fossil fuels, and that's a problem. So to answer your question really directly, we are already behind in terms of how much carbon we have in the atmosphere, and right now the cycle is structured in such a way that we're going to be behind. So we are going to have to look and develop the technologies that will create carbon sinks for us, and not only that, we're going to need to create materials that are carbon sinks, right? Which is going to completely change the whole chain of products that we create. So today we create steel, tomorrow we might create carbon fibers. So those are the kind of things that we need to be thinking about that are going to happen.
Also, I just want to make a comment. I think this is very important, for developed countries, and probably people all realize, the urgency of climate change and try, willing to adopt renewable energies, quickly. But for the developing countries, especially because recently I visited Cambodia, Philippines, and all these countries, they're really the lack of power. But from the government, the consumers, they really want energy. The energy price, electricity price is over 20 cents per kilowatt hour, 20 US cents. So you don't need any subsidy to deploy solar in these countries. But there is no knowledge, no awareness. So if somehow United Nations we need to really push these countries to use renewable energy directly. They can't repeat what happened in developed countries.
All of which, in my view, is an amazing call to action for entrepreneurs to deliver the microgrids and the geothermal and the wind that complements the solar, to build the automated solar rollout that goes around the globe, to do the HVDC and to finance all these things in time, which is what we're about, trying to spawn 100,000 startups to deliver this incredible energy transition in the time it takes on climate. That's why I wanted to bring some of the best minds and best entrepreneurs in the space up. I want you all to thank them. We're going to end it there because we want to give our sound guys and gals a break before Rupert and the April Fishers come on. But please give the panel a big round of applause.